Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I start by welcoming this bill? I'm delighted that it finally takes advantage of one of the freedoms that results from our leaving the European Union, something which I supported at the time and continue to support. As has been indicated, it has had a long gestation. I was the Minister at the time of the issue of the consultation paper in September 2021, and the bill first appeared a year later, although, as the opposition spokesman pointed out, it was a small hiccup which has delayed it a bit further. But it is the case that our current data protection laws almost entirely originate from the European Union and are based on GDPR. Now, at the time of the adoption of GDPR, back in 2016, before that, the UK government actually opposed parts of GDPR. In particular, I can recall that the assessment done at that time was that whilst there were benefits to larger companies, there would be substantial costs for smaller firms, and that indeed has been borne out to be the case. And there was a debate in government about whether or not we should oppose the GDPR regulation when it was going through the process of the Commission formation. And as so often was the case in the European Union, we were advised that if we opposed it, we would lose vital leverage and our ability to influence its development. Now, whether or not we were able then to influence its development is arguable, but nevertheless it was decided that we should not outright oppose it. But it has always been clear that the one-size-fits-all GDPR, which currently is in place, does impose significant costs on smaller firms, and therefore when we had the consultation in 2021, it was plain that a number of particular smaller firms complained about the complexity of GDPR, the uncertainty, the cost that it imposed. And there was seen to be clearly an opportunity to streamline it, not to remove it, but to make it simpler and more understandable and to reduce some of the burdens which it currently imposes. And we do now have that opportunity to diverge. Now, the other thing that came back from the consultation, and I agree with the members opposite who have raised this point, was that there is an advantage in the UK retaining data adequacy with the European Union. It was not necessarily going to be taken for granted that we would get data adequacy. There was a lengthy negotiation with the EU before a data adequacy agreement was reached, and as part of that process, officials rightly looked at what alternative there would be should we not be granted data adequacy. And it became clear that there are ways around it. Standard contractual clauses, alternative transfer mechanisms would allow companies to continue to exchange data. It would be a little more complicated. They would need to write into the clauses into contracts. And for that reason, clearly, there was a value in having a general data adequacy agreement. But one should not think that the loss of data adequacy would be a complete disaster, because, as I say, there are ways around it. So I think the government is right to look at additional adequacy agreements with countries outside the EU, because there lies a great opportunity. The EU has managed to conclude some, but not that many, and the government has rightly identified a number of target countries where we see benefits coming from achieving data adequacy agreements. And it is perfectly possible for us to diverge to a limited extent from GDPR and still retain adequacy. It is notable that the EU recognises the regimes of, for instance, New Zealand as being adequate, even though the New Zealand data protection laws are different from those of the EU. And the fact that we decided to appoint the former New Zealand Information Commissioner as our own Information Commissioner means that he brings a particular degree of knowledge about that, which I imagine will be very useful. But in considering data protection law, it is sometimes said that there is a conflict between privacy, the right to consumers' protection of their data, and the innovation and growth opportunities of technology companies. I don't actually believe that's true. I think the two things have to be integral parts of our data protection laws, because if people believe that their privacy is at risk, they will not trust the exchange of data. And one of the problems is that people generally only read about the problems that arise, particularly from things like ID theft or hacks or the loss of data by people leaving memory sticks on phones, or by cyber criminals hacking into large databases and taking all their financial information. All of those things are a genuine risk, but what they only present one side of the picture. And people generally reach their view about the importance of data protection according to all the risk, without necessarily seeing the real benefits that come from the free exchange of data. And that was the lesson which perhaps COVID showed us more than any other, that by allowing exchange of data, it did allow us to develop and research, for instance, vaccine cures. We were able to research what worked in terms of prevention, in terms of the various measures that could be taken to protect consumers from getting COVID. And therefore, COVID really was the big demonstration of the fact that data exchange can bring real benefits to all consumers. And we are now just on the threshold. Of course, I give way to my honourable friend.
Giving way, and just further to his point about facilitating a trusted mechanism for sharing data, would you agree with me that what's been demonstrated in, for example, the huge global success of open banking in this country shows that if you do have a trust framework that works, then people are not only willing to exchange their data with much more willingness, but also it frees up the economy and creates a world-leading sector at the same time.
Honourable friend, and I think the use of smart data, particularly in open banking, is a demonstration of the benefits that can flow from its use. And actually, that example is one which could be replicated in a large number of other sectors to similar benefit, and that, I hope, will be one of the benefits eventually which will flow from the changes that we are made. Because, as I say, we are on the threshold of an incredibly exciting time. The use of artificial intelligence, automated decision-making, these things will bring real consumer benefits, although of course there has to be safeguards built in. The question of algorithmic bias is something that the Centre for Data Ethics looked at. There was evidence, and obviously we need to take account of that and to build in protections against it. But generally, the opportunities that can flow from making data more easily available are enormous. There are a couple of things I would just flag. In particular, it has long been the case that people have found pop-up banner cookies deeply irritating. They've actually become self-defeating because they are so ubiquitous that everybody just presses yes. And therefore the whole point, which was to acquire informed consent, is undermined if everybody is confronted by these things sort of every time they log on to the internet and just automatically press yes without properly reading what it is they're consenting to. So I think by restricting them to the cookies which do represent intrusive acquisition of data and explaining that to people and requiring consent is clearly an improvement which will make it easier for the exchange of data, but at the same time I think will actually increase consumer protection because people will know that if they're asked to give consent, it is because it is something where they may choose not to allow their data to be used. I understand the concerns that have been expressed about the bill in some areas, particularly about the powers being given to the Secretary of State, but this is a complicated area. It is also one where technology is moving very fast. And the fact that you do need to have legislation which can be flexible and kept up to date with the development of technology probably means that to some extent secondary legislation is the right way forward. But of course these are matters which we will debate in committee, but generally I do believe that this bill will help deliver what was the government's declared intention and that was to make the UK the most successful data-driven technology economy in the world.